Hello again, 201. In this video, I will go over, I think, the first three topics in Chapter 10 on Central Asia, on environment, the population or demographics, and some of the cultural features of this region of the world. And the big environmental problem there was the destruction of the Aral Sea. All the stands of the former Soviet Union are located in Central Asia, and this region forms a large area of the Eurasian landmass. It's the largest in the world. Central Asia is noted for its rigorous climate. There are many high mountains, including the Himalayas, the Hindu Kush, and the Pamir Mountains. And one of the great environmental disasters of the 20th century was the shrinking of what was really an inland lake. It's called the sea. And they've been diverting water from those rivers for centuries, but never on a scale that began after 1950 during the former Soviet Union, where they used the southern boundary of the former Soviet Union and they used this sea for irrigation purposes. And they dug out this canal in order to divert water across the desert of Turkmenistan. And with more water being diverted for farming, the less water that was available for the sea. And I don't know if these are accurate page numbers because this is from an older edition, but I'm sure that this picture is still in the newer edition of the geography textbook. And in the 1990s, this became two lakes. Large salt deposits were seen on the areas that were dried up. And it used to be very productive farmland, but crop yields have declined. And again, I've mentioned this previously. The longer irrigation goes on, eventually salt will build up in the soil. And desertification accelerated and public health declined. Other environmental issues. In this region has the world's largest lake, which is called the Caspian Sea. But again, it doesn't have an outlet to the ocean, so it's really a lake. And this is on the region's western boundary. The fourth largest was the Aral Sea, and Lake Belkhush in eastern Kazakhstan is another noteworthy lake, as is Kyrgyzstan's, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that anymore. It's been a few years. Zhikal, I'm not positive. My forgiveness on that one. And again, I mentioned why they're not really seas. And because they're not drained by rivers, they fluctuate in size depending upon rainfall. And Balkhash has shrunk by 2,000 kilometers in the 21st century. That's not accurate. Can't be 2,000. But it's definitely shrunk. Other problems are the coastlines and rivers are polluted, and because the oil industry is big in Russia as it was in the Soviet Union, there are problems with spills. And in this region, deforestation is not a major problem. It's about the only one we'll discuss this semester that it's not a problem, because there aren't really any forests there. It's too dry. It's a high desert. Population, birth rates, migrations, refugees. Most of the population of Central Asia resides in the narrow belt where the mountains meet the basins and plains. And this was an acronym I came up with for all the different former republics. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and the other two Ks, Kyrgyzstan, and there's one more. Alluvial fans are deposits of sediments that are dropped by streams flowing out of the mountains, and this creates very fertile soil. Loess, we'll talk about when we get to East Asia, was big in China, and it also is widespread in this region. And this river is shared by these three countries. Azerbaijan is another area of agriculture and settlement in this river basin. And the Gobi Desert has a scarcity of exotic rivers, those originating in more humid regions, and remains one of Asia's least populated areas. This is just a geography term. Interesting term, exotic. originating in a more humid region originally. The North Central Asian steppes are lands of nomadic pastoralists, and until 1900, this area had never been plowed. Today, 33% of Mongolians are still pastoralists, but government has forced many to live sedentary lives. And during the Soviet Union times, they converted pasture lands into farmland, and Kazakhstan remains a major producer of spring wheat, and it has the largest population density. This is pretty much a low density environment, and low fertility in western China has been counteracted by the migration of the Han Chinese to this region. As we'll see, they've built a big rail line that connects that outer region with the coasts on the South China Sea and with Beijing and those other heavily populated areas. And even though this helped develop the economy, the native ethnic groups there who are basically following Buddhism, and they are not really too friendly with the Chinese. There's been major problems with Tibet and China proper over the decades. And with the breakup of the Soviet Union, many Russians, Ukrainians, and Germans left Central Asia and they returned home. And Central Asians that try to migrate to places like Moscow or more urban areas, they see a lot of discrimination. And there's been some racial problems in St. Petersburg in the not too far gone past. Vladivostok has a large Central Asian contract worker population, and there are waves of migrations of contract workers has made for a larger population than actual Russian population. And that's on the Pacific side of this area of Russia, Vladivostok. And the oil-rich areas, people go there for employment as well. And Kazakhstan is one of the largest landmass countries in the world. I never realized that until I taught this subject. Urbanization. They had no real cities before modern times, but Samarkand and Bukhara were famous in medieval Europe for their riches and lavish architectures. These were areas on the Silk Road. And this Samarkand was the burial place of Tamerlane, one of the last of the great nomadic warriors. This was the midpoint, as I mentioned, in the Silk Road between China and the Mediterranean. Only 26% of Tajikistan is urban, while Tibet remains largely a rural society despite the influx of the Han. And since 2007, as the wars have calmed down, many Afghanis have gone back to Afghanistan. And the Taliban was in control of Afghanistan for a long time until the wars with the United States. And they are slowly coming back in again. And that has hurt relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan because many Taliban escaped into the caves of the mountains of Pakistan. And Kabul today has over 4 million people. Pretty large. The culture, language, ethnic diversity. Historically, they have evidence, the archaeologists have found farming villages back to the Neolithic period of 8,000 before Common Era. So there's been people there a long, long time. And again, this was the major occupation of people. And the pastoralists dominated Central Asia until gunpowder offset horse cavalry tactics, and then agricultural-based societies slowly developed. This was the area of the Mongols, ladies and gentlemen. The earliest languages were Indo-European, closely related to Persian because of the influence of Darius and the Persian empires in the 1000s. And then the Altaic languages replaced Indo-European languages about 2,000 years ago. The Mongols forced China to build the Great Wall because they were afraid of those attacks. And in the 1100s, under Genghis Khan, the Mongols united the pastoral peoples and they conquered nearby societies. And if you'll recall from World Civilizations 1, the Mongols carved out the largest land-based empire the world had ever seen. And there's a good map in the textbook. Again, these page numbers are from an older edition. Tibet has had a different history. They are Lamaist Buddhist. And the Dalai Lama is their guru. Most groups speak Altaic languages, and there's all kinds of charts if you're interested in this in further detail. Nice colored charts as well. Tibetan is the language of the plateau. Mandarin Chinese is spoken in Tibet and Xinjiang. Mongolian dialects account for 5 million speakers, but the Han Chinese migrants account for 23 million speakers. A lot of people have migrated there. Most Central Asians speak some kind of Turkic language, more than Mongolian and Tibetan combined. Uyghur is an important old language. And because of Chinese immigration, that language has been largely forgotten, or it's shrinking. And these are some other languages of the Stans. And ironically enough, the emerging language of choice is English in Central Asia, as you might think, because of all of these varied groups and different types of languages. This is a way to do business, as we'll see in other parts of the world. It's the language, it's the lingua franca of business. It was never colonized by the outside world. And as a result, nationalism was never the basis of rule. It's based on dynastic family ties. Pashtun is another regional dialect. That's the language of the Taliban. And there's also Shiite Muslim groups who live in the central part of the country, and they speak a form of Persian. About 11% of Afghanistan's population speak some other form of Turkish dialects. And that concludes the first 3 parts of Central Asia.